Hi, I'm Terry Myers. The topic is real people, real harms. My pipelines, plural, hell. I live in Chester County, PA, on a 4-acre property purchased 23 years ago. The property was heavily wooded. For the last 15 years, we have been involved in 4 FERC-controlled projects. Energy companies with eminent domain power that killed our trees, hundreds of trees. We have 3 pipelines on our property. Pipeline 1 was built in 1940, upgraded in 1998. Pipeline 2, 2004. Pipeline 3 project was planned in 2006. No pipeline. Pipeline 4, Project 4, Pipeline 3, 2012. That's the one I'll be focusing on. It's the one in most recent memory. The pipelines cover 1 acre. It's a pipeline field. We use the field between the construction of Pipeline 2 and Pipeline 3. We built a small horse farm. We never realized we were going to have Pipeline 3. 23 years ago, we had 1 small path crossing the land, Pipeline 1. The land around the path was woods. Our first project in 1998 replaced the old pipeline. It was a safety project, and we supported the endeavor. In 2004, the second project came in, and I call this the project that schooled us. Our treatment during the second project can best be summed up by the condition of our dog one night. Our dog rolled in human feces that was left on our land. The FERC-controlled pipeline construction land. Our land was a toilet. 2006, the third project. This is a third project, not a pipeline. Sparrow Point began and was eventually canceled, but not before we were served papers on the fourth project, the third pipeline. FERC allowed 2 companies to actively submit proposals on the same time, on the same path, on the same space. You could lay the maps of the pipeline projects on top of each other. Sparrow Point was eventually canceled by the energy company, but FERC allowed both companies to plan their pipelines on the same space. In fact, during the public meetings on Pipeline 3, Project 4, the FERC representative made a sarcastic statement stating that Sparrow Point pipeline was going to be canceled. We did not get the humor about the time and energy we put in understanding the issues around the third project and the fourth project and the third pipeline. Our property was basically a joke. 2012, fourth project, NiSource PA CH 130.000. We attended the FERC meetings. There were safety implications to the project. Third pipeline being built next to 2 existing pipelines, and at this point, we had horses on the property. The first representative discussed the construction easement and called it a temporary easement. Now, construction easement is the easement they used to build the other pipelines. It's not really a pipeline, but it's temporarily took. And he kept saying temporary, and that the land would revert back after the project. Our temporary easement land had approximately 200 trees. Average age was 100 years old. Woods. The loss of these trees was devastating and not temporary in our lifetime. 300 mature trees have been killed in the 3 pipeline projects over 15 years. Now, at the time, we documented our horse issues to FERC and the land agent. Immediately after negotiations, the land agent was removed, and a new company was hired with no knowledge of our horses. Bait and switch. The new agent was not required to visit our state, let alone our land. Our property and trees were not relevant. I'm a witness to the destruction of trees that had no relevance to the power companies and FERC. I am hopeful that the pipelines were built correctly so my house and farm do not blow up. You know, I was at a lands trust event, and we met a gentleman, and he found out about our pipelines, and he came over and shook our hands and said, "I am so glad to meet you. You're pipeline people." I never wanted to have that title. And what I think is, at least in Chester County, PA, when a new pipeline comes in, they're coming to the same property because they know they're dealing with the same people, and then it keeps it more quiet or easier to deal with because they don't have to affect other people's lives. I am fully aware that I may be dealing with pipeline 4, 5, and 6 in the future. Again, 4-acre property, not that big. And at my worst, especially when I stay up at night, I am soulfully sad.
Good afternoon. We thank you for your work and your sustained attention. I'm going to try to go quickly here. My name's Roberta Motherway Bondurant. I'm with Preserve Roanoke and Bent Mountain and Protect Our Water Heritage Rights. I have volunteered for the last 2 years as a landowner advocate and organizer. Janet, Terry, your stories keep me motivated. We are matches made in heaven. I'm from just south of Roanoke, Virginia, northeast of Virginia Tech, an almost 4,000-foot mountain, an upland plateau of rich, fertile farmland, orchards, springs, streams, vineyards, Bent Mountain, Virginia, home to the Nature Conservancy's Bottom Creek Gorge Preserve, the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Crooked Road Music Trail, and Floyd Fest. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, the MVP, a consortium of private LLCs, proposes to cross this place. Since October 2014, residents have suffered abuses from so-called survey statutes or forced surveying. Far from typical boundary surveys, they allow, circumventing permission, they allow data mining and physical takings of soils, rock samples, vegetation, and cultural artifacts that could not be otherwise obtained. Landowners own not just their property, though. They own the information on its water, flora, and fauna. In the information age, all of that holds certain value. Under federal fast-track permitting rules, these statutes are being used upfront, pre-application, pre-certification as part of the larger act of taking by an incestuous state and federal statutory scheme. There are no restrictions on what gas companies may do with this information, no present process whereby landowners can obtain copies of reports, no apparent disposal of the information in the event these pipelines are denied. Virginia's statute includes consequences for failure of notice to landowners that include criminal and civil trespass. Landowners have sought enforcement of these provisions. Still, many crews descend upon properties regardless of whether the landowner is present, without apparent background checks or personal identification tags or IDs. It's very much like the Wild Wild West in Southwest Virginia under these survey statutes. Virginia's statute is so poorly written, it promotes legalized theft. It should be deemed unenforceable. It's presently on appeal in one of our federal courts, and it will be heard before the Virginia Supreme Court, I understand, in the February-March docket. Many working landowners, though, simply can't be present when the company decides to show up. But those most vulnerable to these laws, of course, include many fragile and elderly folks living alone. In its application, MVP admits Mountain Valley Pipeline has admitted that the elderly are disproportionately affected in each of the 11 counties it proposes to blast through in West Virginia and Virginia. But it insists it has no obligation to mitigate for the elderly because it would do them no harm. On Columbus Day Monday, with courts closed, 2 weeks before its own scheduled hearing on the survey issue, MVP circumvented its own requested court process by landing over 30 surveyors on 2 properties of sizable acreage. You all have the video. With county police representing, they were powerless to help landowners at the scene. These surprise invasions went forward. At day's end, a 6th-generation descendant wept when surveyors showed her 6 bags of artifacts they dug from her family's historic property. They told her they couldn't give her the GIS data points, so she could return them to their sacred place. With possibly 3 armed parties at any scene, the inconsistent enforcement of the provisions of the Virginia statute are a recipe for mayhem. We are asking state courts and legislators for abolishment of these statutes, but federal authorities should take heed. These abuses are dangerous and intolerable. Long before gas lobbyists sponsored these statutes, we wrote a constitution that embraced a fundamental right to private property, with private being the operative word. When we fail to revolt against the invasion and plundering of our home places, which give life to the human right of privacy, then we have lost what it is to be American. Much more than that, we've lost what it is to be human. Lilliputians, water protectors, each of us together, we will prevail. Yes. Thank you.
William? Oh, it's not there.
I'm reading for William.
You're reading for William.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Corinne Bell. I'm from the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and I'll be reading the testimony of William Houston, who could not be here today. My name is William Houston. I live in Broome County, New York, just across the border and downwind of some of the most heavily fracked counties in Pennsylvania. With shale gas fracking comes pipelines, and with pipelines come compressor stations. Today, I want to tell you about the rights which were denied to me. That is, my right to participate in and to have my health protected by an environmental review under NEPA of some of the largest individual and aggregate sources of air pollution in the Northeast. This is due to a racket conducted by a nexus of the oil and gas industry, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and by FERC. The object of this scam is to ensure that some of the largest compressor stations, clearly jurisdictional under the Natural Gas Act, avoid federal environmental review. The Natural Gas Act says at 15 U.S.C. 717b, the provisions of this chapter shall apply to the transportation of natural gas in interstate commerce. And at 717 FC1A, no natural gas company shall engage in the transportation or sale of natural gas subject to the jurisdiction of the Commission, or undertake the construction of any facilities therefore, unless there is in force a certificate of public convenience and necessity issued by the Commission authorizing such acts or operations. The key phrase here being subject to the jurisdiction of the Commission. As you may know, executive agencies are authorized by statute, the United States Code. The agencies must then create detailed rules which implement the law under the authority of the APA. This is the Code of Federal Regulations. Yes, these agencies essentially write their own rules. The problem is the nexus of FERC and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration have delegated, without the authority of Congress, authorship of critical sections of the regulations to the very industries they are supposed to regulate. This is called inclusion by reference. At 49 CFR 192.1, we find that the PHMSA has decided that onshore gathering lines are not subject to the Natural Gas Act, and at section 192.8 have delegated the definition to the American Petroleum Institute in document API RP80, which is included by reference. At least a dozen large compressor stations within 50 miles of my home, which pump high-pressure methane into FERC-regulated transmission lines for the purpose of interstate commerce, are built without a FERC certificate, and thus without NEPA review. While these facilities are clearly jurisdictional under the NGA, FERC looks the other way and allows these facilities to be constructed without a certificate while granting these same companies certificates to build pipelines. I believe these violations of our federal environmental laws are criminal in nature. Congress should clarify this law and prosecute those responsible. Thank you.
My name is Lily Sheline. Leslie hurt her foot and couldn't make it today. So I am also with Calvert Citizens for Healthy Community. And I live within view of the Dominion Cove Point facility. Leslie lives in Cove Point Beach. These are her words. This is her testimony. And specifically, she wanted to talk about the impact on the community of this FERC-approved project vis-a-vis policing. I live in a small Chesapeake Bay community in southern Maryland called Cove Point Beach. It lies in a gentle peninsula of land that slopes 3 miles down a hill, the tip of which curls into the bay. A single 2-lane road leads into and out of our community. 1.5 miles up the road from our beach lies the entrance to Dominion Cove Point LNG, a fracked gas export facility. 1 mile from the same spot in the other direction, in Bay waters, lies Dominion's shipping export platform. Our citizen research has shown this facility to be stunningly toxic and unsafe. However, the response from our elected officials has been tepid at best, or dismissive, or outright contemptuous. We've witnessed Maryland's governor falling asleep during our testimony, hostile evasions of us in Annapolis, and eye-rolling silence from our local officials. Still, we persist. It has been and continues to be important to meet with all officials. So, after evading our request to meet for a year, our local sheriff's office finally agreed. The small group of special operations officers whose county jobs are financed by Dominion Resources would not answer any of our very specific questions, citing Homeland Security, that convenient catch-all like the junk drawer in our kitchens. But they assured us that everything was safe and not to worry. We didn't know then that it was the police themselves who would soon become a source of worry for us. Example 1, it started with the phone calls I made on 2 separate occasions about unbearable noise levels emanating from the facility. The first time an officer responded saying the captain would follow up shortly, which of course he never did. The next time, I again turned desperately to the police for help, and they responded simply by saying, Dominion can do whatever it wants. On the second example, on another occasion, an elderly member of our neighborhood watch questioned someone lingering in our community. My neighbor was then pulled over and surrounded by police, who explained that he was being pulled over for, quote, harassing a Dominion employee, close quote. When my neighbor offered his explanation, the officer said, you're not the plaintiff, so your side of the story does not matter. On several occasions, I use SWAT and Special Operations interchangeably. They refer themselves as both. On several occasions, SWAT officers have come zooming down into our neighborhood, cruising back and forth in a frenzied search for peaceful protesters. These officers wear lanyards with double-sided identity tags. One side says Dominion employee, the other County Sheriff's Office. On one occasion, the stop included personal pat-downs of all passengers in 2 cars, drug-sniffing dogs, car searches, and 1 arrest for carrying prescription drugs without the actual prescription present. Dominion's Chief of Security, Lou Blancato, also showed up within minutes of that call, so he was there immediately overseeing this, and there were something like 5 or 6 cop cars there. At a public meeting, another example, at a public meeting, an officer brusquely demanded that we move our tabling tent to a less prominent area in the parking lot outside the meeting. When we pointed to Dominion's elaborate setup and prime spot, arguing for fair play, he retorted, it's their gig, they can do what they want. We had to point out to him that it was a public meeting, not Dominion's meeting. Leslie goes on to give a few other examples of situations where peaceful marchers, peaceful protesters, people standing on private lawns, holding up signs, protesting the facility, asking for quantitative risk assessment, were basically intimidated by police driving back and forth, filming them, etc. They like to film us, and they like to take pictures of our cars and our license plates. She continues, we have been protesting safely and peacefully for citizens' rights and interests for a few years now. Like so many white and privileged Americans, I have never been particularly fearful of police. Indeed, quite the opposite. However, my experiences with finding and disseminating the truth of this ill-conceived fracked gas facility has completely changed my view. Has completely changed my view. The unapologetic level of intimidation and obstruction of civil rights by the police, sanctioned by a corporate entity, is terrifying. There is a dangerous blurring of the lines here, an outrageous conflict of interest, and complete corporatization of a public service, policing. This is corporate and government collusion that undermines citizens' arrests and rights. And we, FERC asserts, are just another community unimpacted by their approval machine. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Jerry Ann Civilek from Lambertville, New Jersey, and I am opposed to the billion-dollar, 118-mile Penny's natural gas pipeline from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. On September 2nd, 2016, Dr. T.C. Onstead, his colleague, and myself were in the back of my 55-acre horse property collecting water and soil samples when we detected an ominous noise coming from the existing 5 20-inch pipelines that cross one another on my property. I have attached a timeline of the outline of these calls that were made during this time. This situation is still ongoing. To make matters worse, Penny's is proposing to put the pipeline less than a quarter mile from the existing 5 pipes that cross one another and would have to go under 3 of the already compromised lines. In the wake of all the explosions that have happened recently, why would FERC allow Penny's to risk the safety of myself and others around these weakened and damaged lines? When I notified PIMSA of the noise coming from the pipeline on my property, I was promptly told it was the weekend and I should call my local fire department. The DOT, local police, and fire departments, congressmen, senators, and Spectra have all been notified of this hazard, and not one of these agencies know how to handle the situation. I've had linemen come out, and they did not know what this noise was. Let's see, where am I? I have received 2 letters from Spectra. The first stating that they will inspect the pipe making the aforementioned noise, and upon inspection of sections of pipe will either be recoded or shortened, or short segments of new pipe will be installed and coated. The second came 2 months later after no action had been taken, stating that the land surveyors would be walking the right-of-way of the 2 existing 20-inch pipelines, merely noting any structures in the vicinity. So that kind of scared me. The U.S. DOT is the agency responsible for overseeing these pipelines, and the response I received from them is very disconcerting. The U.S. DOT repeats what Spectra tells them it's doing, and Spectra's word is accepted without any further investigation. The DOT is also not privy to the PSI going through these lines when I asked. In the wake of all the explosions happening, this is in no way acceptable. I have transcribed the messages from Karen Gentile of the DOT, and I have enclosed it. No one is overseeing the safety of older pipelines, yet they are developing unneeded new infrastructures. My husband and I have worked our entire lives to be able to live here, only to have FERC and Spectra tarnish what should be our golden years. My days are spent listening to low-flying helicopters and planes while having trespassers invade my privacy, peace, and safety. I am now more afraid of FERC and Spectra and our government compromising my safety than I am of ISIS. I love my country, but I am ashamed of my government. And also, my entire farm is powered by geothermal and solar, and I will now be surrounded on 3 sides with pipelines. This is an outrage, and my love and support and peace go out to the people out in Standing Rock. Hang in there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Bottorff, and I am an ecological economics consultant. My colleagues and I have investigated multiple natural gas pipeline proposals. We analyzed all scoping comments submitted to FERC for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which many of you here have talked about. We're working on a similar analysis for Penny's pipeline. I'm here to demonstrate to you that the concerns and abuses you have heard today are not special cases. These are the norms and daily terrors people affected by pipelines face. The scoping period is a key part of any National Environmental Policy Act process. At that stage, any person with an interest in the proposed federal action, in this case the approval or denial of approval for a pipeline, has a chance to tell the lead agency, in this case FERC, what concerns them about the proposed action and what they think the lead agency should include in its ensuing environmental review. During the scoping period for various pipelines, FERC receives thousands of individual comments. These comments include excellent information about the economic and other effects that citizens, scientific experts, and various stakeholders expect to see or are already seeing as a result of proposed pipelines. The content of these letters is critically important for two reasons. First, the letters provide direct and clear information about the issues of concern to the people living in the communities through which the pipeline would pass, as well as to people who, as visitors, downstream water users, business owners, and others, enjoy and use the affected landscape. The comment letters help FERC understand the nature and extent of the effects of the proposed pipeline. Second, the letters provide a benchmark for evaluating the quality of FERC's NEPA review. Under NEPA, FERC must cover relevant issues raised in the scoping phase. Our independent review can therefore help ensure that what citizens have said during scoping does not get lost on the way to a draft environmental impact statement, and that FERC meets its legal obligation to consider the full range of environmental effects of proposed pipelines. FERC does not have a good track record in this regard, so let's consider today what the people most likely to suffer the ill effects of pipelines have to say about the proposals. The vast majority of comments submitted to FERC express negative opinions and serious concerns about the proposed pipelines. These concerns are greatest among people who would be directly affected by the proposed pipelines. For example, people who live in counties a proposed pipeline would cross are more concerned about environmental impacts than are people who live farther away, perhaps in a different state. 98.8% of commenters said the Atlantic Coast Pipeline will have a negative effect on property values, tourism, and recreation. Additionally, 99% of commenters said the Atlantic Coast Pipeline will harm their water and their health. The list goes on. The ACP is expected to have negative effects on forests, culture and lifestyle, safety, and other values important to the people of West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. If FERC once again ignores these very real and well-founded concerns, decisions about the ACP, the MVP, the PennEast, and the rest will mean more unjustified pipelines and more excess environmental harm. With the huge majority of citizens expressing negative attitudes about the environmental and economic effects of the proposed pipelines, it is intolerable that FERC does not give citizens greater consideration. Thank you.